Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dovecote episode 22 with Andrew Gillis. It is 7:03 p.m. on April 1st. This may be April Fool's Day, but this is genuinely a normal episode of the Dovecote. Um, Andrew, please say hi and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Andrew Gillis. Thanks for having me on. Um, for folks listening, I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a role-playing game designer. I recently published a game called Girl by Moonlight.
Hell yeah. Um, yeah, I was not able to sift through a Girl by Moonlight until like a little bit, just when you sent it over before the stream while we were in call. Um, but I'm like immediately really in love with the concept behind it. Like uh the choice to uh lean into like both this kind of like more like solid like narrativized element like the series, and also kind of play with like the Forged in the Dark structure is really cool. I'd love to
Mm.
hear about like kind of where the inspirations for this game came from.
Well, yeah, definitely the kind of inciting incident was watching Puella Magica for the first time and
Oh
being like,
fuck
whoa, this
yes.
show is fucked up.
God.
And it kind of reminding me after a very long um, estrangement about my love for magical girl fiction, and that within the context of my kind of burgeoning queer awakening, synthesized into this idea of like, yeah, magical girls as metaphor for like trans identity stuff and queer identity stuff. And so um, I felt inspired. I started working on a prototype of the game, and then shortly after starting it as a Powered by the Apocalypse game, I got onto Blades in the Dark and was like, oh, well, this would be perfect for doing this kind of like slightly harder edged or more tragic magical girl thing that I was getting excited about, with, Blades's kind of like stress grind and vice and all these other structures within the game. I started thinking of ways to adapt those into uh, a quite different context, but still keeping some of that spirit of Blades in the Dark.
Yeah, it's really cool to see just kind of sifting, because I haven't really had a chance to like read, but just the way that you've like recontextualized a lot of the elements of Blades. I'm a big fan of both Blades itself and a number of hacks of it, and I think this one looks really great. Um, I
Yeah, some of the
yeah.
big, or sorry,
Oh no, good.
some of the big structural things to highlight are like, so it still has character playbooks, but then instead of a crew type where you would be, assassins or smugglers or drug dealers or whatever, uh, that's all been lumped into this thing I call the series playset. And rather than be crew type, it's kind of like a bundle of setting, tone, and story elements that then the players all collaborate in kind of generating a world and the antagonism, but they're all themed quite differently. So there's one that's like classic magical girl stuff like Sailor Moon or Steven Universe, that's very optimistic. There's one that's Madoka, that's really like extra tragic and dark and messy. There's one for kind of like fighting giant space monsters and giant robots. There's like a mecha kaiju magical girl thing, and then a kind of psychosexual dream traveler one that's really inspired by the works of Satoshi Kon as well as Serial Experiments Lane. And so it was fun to have that uh, solving a mechanical problem of like, cool, what do I put in place of the crew in this game that's working on a very different kind of framework and has like one type of group. So therefore, what do we do with this part of the game that is still integral and adapting that into this other thing? It was part of the fun of having it be very much like a hack first in my design mentality. I
Mhm.
wasn't so much trying to like author a brand new game within the engine, but really try to like do an adaptation of the existing one, if that makes sense as a distinction.
Yeah, no, I definitely see that. Like, I think something that I really like appreciate here is the um I think the choice to like the way that you've decided to have the series work is really inspired in the sense that like I think like when a lot of people think of the crew in a Force in the Dark game, they'll often think of like this is a thing that brings our characters together, and it's like the threat can can bring you together. I think that's really wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, and I feel like oftentimes in games there's this really stark delineation between like the antagonism, which there's a GM, and the GM is responsible for making up and determining all of the antagonism, and that there are then players and their player characters who are, and those are like hermetically sealed from each other. Whereas I think, especially in a game that's about like this kind of societal oppression and struggle, that it's really helpful to have the whole table collaborate and be excited about the same kind of antagonism. And then you can still have that separation later, because it's not fun to play your own antagonist, but if they help author it, it's going to be more tightly connected to the characters that they then make, the things that they're interested in. It's a way that they can signal to the GM what they're excited about, and then the GM, which is called the director in my game, it makes their job easier because everyone's kind of already laid out very clearly a bunch of signals, as well as therefore streamlined and smoothed in their characters to fit within that framework. It's not these, a bunch of disparate OCs coming to the table, and then we try to figure out how they could possibly all fit together, and then bracket them into a crew type or whatever.
Yeah, I really like I think that idea of like not separating players from engaging with the antagonism is really good. Because like I feel like there is sometimes an urge to be like, okay, making a game and the players should be like deep in the boots of their characters, right? Like they should only be concerned about like things that matter or affect their characters directly, or are in control, or like in the control of their characters. And I think it's really fun to explore to explore the player as separate from the character in a lot of ways.
Yeah, for me, when I'm playing games, that's definitely like always the stance that I'm in. Like I'm not a big I'm sort of anti-immersion, like softly. I think people can
Mm-hmm.
experience whatever they experience. I'm not going to argue with anyone about their own experience, but for me, like I'm always aware that I'm playing a game. When I'm playing a game, I don't experience this kind of like fabulistic sense of immersion where I'm just like totally in it. But what I do experience is a sense of like deep immersion or integration within the operations of the game itself, and that includes fiction. But I'm never trying to lose an awareness of the fact that I am playing a game. And in fact, the act of playing a game is something that I find really exciting and gripping. And so thinking about like how the mechanical bits that I have available to me are going to interact with the fiction that's in front of me, all this kind of stuff that can really drive me. But yeah, I don't like that. Um, I'm not hostile to that delineation of like, I am a player in the game at all times, always. I'm not fully my character or fully one or the other.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of validity to that. I think like I feel like there's a lot of validity to however you want to play, and like you know I know a lot of people who are really into like playing with bleed as a mechanic, or as an element of play, which I think is
Hmm.
wonderful. And
Yeah, and it can be
yeah,
really helpful when games, acknowledge those truths of the practice of role playing.
yeah. I remember there were a bunch of people who got mad about the Vampire the Masquerade page on Bleed, and it was like, actually, this is great. Actually, this is wonderful and very well written. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, gosh.
yeah.
What is
Um,
there to be mad at? I don't get it.
yeah. I think sometimes people just want to be angry, and
Yeah, fair enough, I suppose.
yeah.
There are other reasons to be angry at Vampire the Masquerade, but
Yeah. It's true. Um, but speaking of playing, are there any games that you've been playing recently that you'd like to kind of point towards, or any even reading recently, or excited to play that you'd kind of like to point folks towards, or talk about?
well, I'm at the end of this week and the coming weekend, I'm going to play my first session of Apocalypse Keys with some friends of mine.
Oh yes.
And we've recently wrapped up with that same group playing a game called Delver, which was sort of Delver was this like dungeon, very like, uh, gosh, how to describe this? It's a very like Dark Souls inspired dungeon crawly kind of game that is also, at least the way we ended up playing it, was like fairly abstract and does a bunch of interesting stuff with how it splits up authorship within the game. So like it's playing with that line of who's authoring antagonism and how quite a lot. And it was quite interesting and compelling.
Hell yeah. Let me hunt that down.
And so I think there's like Delver second edition or something. They've published an update
Ah,
recently.
yes, here we are.
Yeah,
Cool.
definitely had a nice experience with that. And then unfortunately, over the past like 6 months or so, I haven't gotten to play games very much. So it's been a bit of a drought for me. So that Delver game was kind of my first long running thing in quite a while.
That'll happen.
Yeah.
um, I still haven't gotten around to Apocalypse Keys. It looks wonderful. Actually, it does kind of bring me up to a topic that I was kind of curious about. Um,
Mm.
Apocalypse Keys, another Evil Hat game, Girl by Moonlight, Evil Hat. Um, what is sort of working with a larger, or medium-sized kind of indie publisher look like that?
Yeah, it's funny because like they are a publisher and there are a lot of perks that come with working with a publisher, that they are going to have you know, they're going to handle layout for you, they're going to handle marketing for you. They have all this experience and everything already kind of lined up so that your work can fit into their pipeline. In the case of my specific experience of it, I had the game kind of uh, at like my first playable prototype that I brought out of the kind of Forged in the Dark version that I really tried it out. It was at Go Play Northwest back in 2017 or something, or I think 2017. And it just so happened that I knew John Harper from before, and he was there, and I haggled him into playing it with me. And it was myself, John, my friend Violet, and my friend Andy, who I had just met, but we later became friends. And so that was like this really good table. We played the game. We had a really lovely session of this kind of early prototype of it. And Sean Nittner, who knows John because they published Blades in the Dark and they're friends, Sean came by and sat in on it. He asked, hey, can I just like check this out, see what you guys are up to? And so he watched us play. We had a nice time. We had a very good session. We talked about it a bit. Sean had some questions, and then I got an email from him like a week later. I was at work and I went on break and checked my email, and he had offered me a publishing deal. And so the relationship was one where I did all of the design work of the game. They didn't care to have any input on that, and they just wanted me to like do my thing and then bring it to them, and they would take it from being a completed work of game design to a completed product as a book, as a physical book.
Hmm.
So it's kind of how I understood it. So they helped set me up with some editing and stuff like that for when I was writing the manual, which was a very painful process for me because I haven't done a lot of that kind of writing before. And then they provided art direction. They have a roster of artists that they know and have connections with, and so we brought in a bunch of those. And I was still able to like have some input and make decisions with that. And all in all, through the process, they were very supportive. And it is a very small publisher at the end of the day. It's kind of like it's Sean and Fred and Tom, the marketing guy. I hope I'm remembering his name right. We didn't interact much, but it's basically like Sean and Fred are the company, and then they have a couple of people that they work very closely with and very frequently with, and then it's freelancers and stuff like that that are in their stable of people that they'll go to. So it's a lot of emails with Sean.
Neat. Yeah, that very much aligns with like I feel like every story that I've heard about games in this vein, like there's kind of so much of it is like circumstance and who you know and networking and like
And just dumb luck a lot of the
double
time. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that'll definitely do it. Um yeah. I am curious. Do you have anything that you're working on now, or any projects like from the past that you'd like to talk about that folks might be interested in?
Yeah, I've got kind of three things that I'm juggling at the moment. One of which is uh, on the back burner and I can't really talk about, but it's waiting for some other stuff to happen. And then I'm trying to write this smaller two-player game, which is very like prose oriented. It's almost like a writing exercise for two players.
Ooh, fun.
Um, and it's inspired by the show Russian Doll, if you're familiar with that, where there's this one scene of her birthday party that repeats throughout the show, but also degrades as the show goes on, and elements of it start to fall away. And so there's this idea of like the arc of play is defined by this prose that you lay out, but then also eliminate chunks of as you go until by the end, as you're kind of running down the clock of the story, you're down to just like these couple sentences of what used to be, a multi-paragraph little mini scene that you would describe at the start of each kind of arc for your character.
That sounds wonderful. That almost sounds like kind of a linguistic Ten Candles in some ways. Not to immediately draw comparisons, but
but yeah, there are lots of like prose games to reference and draw on for it. So I'm trying to like check out some of those and refresh my memory of what the history of such games are.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm excited to see that.
And it'll be nice to just have like a smaller project. It doesn't require a 230-page manual. It's not, it's easier to play test. It only requires 2 players, these kinds of things. Because, Girl by Moonlight was my first game, and to go through that whole long arc of making it and publishing it means that I didn't get to do a lot of, practice and throw away stuff and make bad drawings so I can learn to make good drawings. I didn't really get to do that. I ended up pouring lots of time and energy and failure and iteration into one project, which means that you end up carrying a lot of technical debt or design debt with you. You end up having a lot of sunk cost that you're struggling with. It's I wouldn't recommend it, even though it I think mostly worked out and the game turned out quite good. There was a lot working against that being the outcome.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I have uh so I don't know if you know this about me. So I have a 1,000+ TTRPG called Sapphic World that I've been working on for like 2-3 years now. And I've also been publishing other games while I've been working on it.
So that's like your big stone around your neck that you're carrying with you, this Sapphic
Yeah.
World.
You it's I so yeah, that is to say, like, I that is very relatable, like the idea of having technical debt from a like really big project that like things that you've learned that are maybe not the best patterns. It'll it'll really get you.
Yeah, yeah. It's something that I really missed out on for myself, and so I'm trying to claw it back, because then my other project that's like my next big project is this idea I have for a game called Hell's Electorate, which is a parliamentary procedural set in hell.
Ooh.
And it is a impossible design nightmare that is like no one can actually make this game. It's the worst idea I've ever had. I'm not going to try to do it. And so I'm trying to like do some other smaller stuff so that I can iterate and develop some ideas that then are going to matter for that game, because it is going to have stuff around manipulation of prose, and that there's going to be like a document that is the law, and you edit and amend the law in the course of play. And that's like one of the central operations of play is modifying the law. And the law includes like rules of the game in these kind of oblique ways. And so you end up modifying how play works in the course of it and stuff like this. It's going to be a whole absurd, horrible thing that I'm doing to myself. But I'm really excited about the idea. So I'm going to try to do it and kind of work up to it in small steps by having some other projects along the way that feed into it or prototype certain concepts.
That sounds really interesting. Uh it's been like, I feel like we're I don't know. I feel like I know so many wonderful designers who are kind of moving towards their like uh uh their mammoth
Yeah,
in one way or
their white
another.
whale or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
I
I
made
know.
one commercially successful game, and now I feel I have free license to do the most stupid bullshit that I can think of.
Yeah, but it sounds good that you're trying to experiment and like make smaller stuff. I think that's really good. Um, I I know I had Jay Dragon on the other the other stream, and Jay's been working on 7-part Pact, which is a seven. It's like 7 zines that connect to each other, and each zine is like
Mm,
you're a different wizard. Um, and
Oh, cool.
that's really fun. But that's also like an unpublishable book. So I love seeing and hearing about these sorts of things. I think it's really fun. Um,
Yeah, a
are
lot of the most interesting projects aren't going to fit into kind of the traditional mode of like packaging and presenting role-playing games.
Yeah. Are there any like areas in game design that you're like excited to explore in future projects now that you have like a you're some you know got a couple buckles in your belt, etc.
Well, yeah, definitely this idea of prose as a unit of play is something that I'm pursuing at the moment, and I think is cool and has some potential. At its deepest in that concept of like, you know, almost drawing on some like legacy game ideas around like the operations of the game change as you play it, or the game responds to how you're playing it, through these kind of editing, redaction, and addition or amendment to those bodies of text that are mechanical or rules, you know, essentially are parts of the rules. Um, and then also, I think I'm keen to move away from any sort of GM framing for games. I'm going to try to do stuff that's a bit more distributed, and also um, playing around with how that authority gets parceled up and distributed, and trying to leverage that in some interesting ways. Um, like something I want to do on the project that I can't talk very much about. One of the prototypes I have for it is this thing where you like it has sort of a belonging outside belonging notion of like you have a character type or like a playbook, and then there's also like some environmental or antagonism level pieces that get mechanized and put on sheets. But rather than pass those around through play, your character or your like play perspective is formed out of the merger of two of those. So you have like half of your sheet comes from one of those things, and the other half comes from another, and you kind of bolt them together, and that's your character slash faction, whatever that you're embodying. So
That sounds neat.
some kind of interlocking modular systems ideas as well, which comes out of Girl by Moonlight, which is a very modular design, right? Where there's 7 character types that can each work in any of the 4 series, and they have moves that they can borrow and share between each other and stuff like that. But then there are also certain mechanics that cross over and don't, these kinds of things. So it's a space that I've worked in a bit in the past, and that I find fun as someone who likes to do kind of, I still like crunchy mechanical games in a certain sense, but I'm not really. I've played too much D&D in my time, and I'm over it, and I don't really want to do like combat sims or tactical maps or things like that. So I'm taking that love of crunchiness and trying to adapt it into, fun crunchy fictional stuff, or fun crunchy mechanics that are not about combat.
Yeah, I really like the idea of the modular element because that's something that I've explored as well, and I think is like really neat. Because I there's so many like so many like axes that you can kind of play off that with. Yeah. Uh, we have a good amount of news today, and some of it is pretty chunky. So let's hit the news. Gosh, yes, okay. I'm remembering now. It's all coming back to me. Okay.
Ugh, the events that continue to unfold before us,
Things
alas.
sometimes what's the was it a Marx quote? I don't remember, but the quote about how sometimes there are weeks where nothing happens, there are months where decades happen, whatever it is.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
one. Um, so let me get these in order really quick. I forgot to do that. Um, but yeah. I'll also ask, are there any games that are coming up that you're excited about, and anything that's like that you're excited to play that's kind of in the air, or you like funded on Kickstarter or any other crowdfunder?
Well, I recently backed Luke Jordan's Grand Guignol,
Ah, yes.
and so I can't wait to get my hands on that. But unfortunately, I am either a year to 2 years backlogged on games. So like I'm finally getting around to Apocalypse Keys, for example, or I'm just like totally isolated because I don't currently have a like local scene that I'm connected
Right.
to. and I have a couple leads to follow that I need to chase down once my mental health stops spiraling, where I might be able to start building that connection again. But it's been a long time since I've had that, and it really does kind of take you out of the practice and the evolution and the culture of the hobby, which is something I really need to fix, especially as a designer. God, it's criminal, right? Not to be playing games.
That's okay. It's allowed.
So at the moment, I'm like a weird hermit who just comes down off the mountain and is like, here's my thing. And they're like, we have no idea what the fuck you're talking about. What is this?
Sometimes, well, I mean, I my thought on like whether, on the kind of design on that, I guess, is I really feel like as long as you're like looking at something, like as long as you're exploring something, I think you're
Yeah.
still gathering things that are useful in tabletop design.
You're never, as long as you're not, fully in a vacuum, right? You're engaging with some part of the field
Yeah, or
some
even
other
like,
thing that you're bringing in.
yeah, like if you're playing games or if you're watching movies or reading books, like I think no matter what, if you're looking at art, like I think all these things can kind of inform, reading history. Like if these things will
Yes.
inform, can and will inform like your design. I don't think you have to feel bad for not playing games. Um, I also don't think people should feel bad for not playtesting their games, but that's a whole other. I like playtesting my games a lot, and it's the way that I design these days. But I have a lot of respect for just like I'm gonna put this shit out there and you're gonna look at it. Um,
Yeah. There's kind of a, like, I think that's fine to do as long as you're upfront about that's what, that's what
mhm.
you're doing. I think there's a certain amount of disclosure is appropriate there because people do have expectations that they're bringing in. But yeah, like, so much of the early era of role playing was, laying track in front of the minecart as it was rolling, right? Like the idea of a game that's had, hundreds or thousands of hours of playtesting is a very modern contrivance, and not even necessarily strictly one that comes from our own field of role-playing game design. It's almost like
Mhm.
the expectations around testing are more in line with like AAA video game production and stuff like that. And you come to someone who's a one-person operation self-publishing something on itch.io and you're like, why haven't you playtested this for 1,000 hours? And it's like, well, what do you expect? Who's going to do that? So yeah, absolutely. I think there's room for a wide range of degrees of engagement with that.
Yeah, I am. I think people should be happy to play around with their design and get loose with it and have fun. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, okay. We'll hit like I think maybe one or two news stories, then we'll take a break.
Great.
And then we'll do the last one, and then emails. So please send your emails to darnellydimedclips@gmail.com. Uh, we love answering your questions, and yeah, let's get into it. So, the first story, which is kind of, so I was talking with Will Yobst, who made this Discord has Ghosts in it and Torque and some other games last week, and we were talking about how there was a question about like layout, and we were like, yeah, you could use Affinity. Some people even use Canva, and here we are. It was
Yes.
literally like the day after. It was I think this was on the Tuesday. Um, it's like actually, Affinity is Canva, so uh, fuck you, Affinity is Canva now. Um, so yeah, Canva has announced that they have acquired Affinity, um, and it's it is what it is. Canva, a company with a known history of pretty lofty subscription prices and ever changing functionalities and shifting shifting priorities.
Yeah, this
And
whole model of like innovation for its own sake so that you can seem to be doing something so that you can keep the subscription money rolling
yeah,
in.
they're a rent
the Adobe
keeper,
model.
or
Yeah,
yeah, and
yeah,
Affinity, a company that for the most part has just been like, yeah, have our product and you can, update it for perpetuity as long as your license is like good, and even then you can just use the old version if you can't update it,
yeah.
and I'm very worried about Affinity getting kind of enshittified, uh, because I mean, when I ask like a lot of layout professionals what they use, it's Affinity. They're using Affinity.
Yeah, and like any product that works on a more humane model the way Affinity did is a threat to the business models of all these companies like Adobe, Canva, et cetera, who want to be able to insert themselves as in-between operators between you and the product you need. And so, of course, they're going to gobble it up so that they can deny you that alternative. Or
Yeah.
maybe it's what's best for the product. What do I know? I always
Right.
take the cynical stance on these things.
No, I think you're right. I I like my understanding is Canva has said that there's not going to be any major changes to Affinity's business model. I don't really trust that. I am suspecting some problems in the future for Affinity users. I do hope at least that like the current versions of Affinity can be maintained, at least for the people who have it. But it's a shame. It's a shame that like uh, these tools that are useful for like folks in this industry are just controlled by um, the ebbing and flowing of the market. um,
Yeah, and it's frustrating when you need to have such an antagonistic relationship with the people who are supplying you with products. Like I have an ebook reader, an e-reader that I use that has been in airplane mode for its entire existence, so that I don't get any predatory firmware updates. I don't get any like extra invasive DRM stuff. Like I had to make a very deliberate stance to like entrench myself against encroachment through this product that's just meant to allow me to read books. Never mind, something that's essential to my livelihood, like a layout or writing application.
yeah, uh, this is like a little thing, and it's not even like I think what the thing that this is for me is like I I wish updates were better archived. I guess is kind of my main point here. Is like a game that I play, a video game that I play, No Man's Sky, which is a space
Mm.
game. For the longest time, you had to find ships. You had to find spaceships, and you like you'd search for hours and hours looking for the one that you want. And
Oh, I did that. Yep.
yes, and just recently they added a thing where it's like you can just design your spaceship with parts and colors and stuff, and it's like that's wonderful. But also like the version of the game where a spaceship that looks a certain way is is a prize or is something
Or that
exceptional
you
is
just
now not there anymore. You can't get that game anymore.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly. And that game gets overwritten by this other notion of the game. It's like if a book you were reading was still getting edits as you were
yeah,
midway through reading it, right? And they were like, "Oh, we've actually scrapped that B plot and it's this other thing now."
yeah. Well, there was that Spider Verse where like the most recent Spider Verse movie that they had like changes that were rolling into theaters as the movie
Oh,
was
did they
coming out.
patch the movie? I
They
wasn't aware of
patched the
that. That's
movie, yeah.
amazing.
At least that's my
Oh my
understanding of
god.
it. There were a couple of bits that were different or removed or other stuff in the final in like the DVD versus the theater version and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and
And I
which
mean,
is to yeah, sorry,
oh no, no, go ahead, go ahead.
just to connect back like this is the thing like we don't have control over the tools and products and media that we enjoy or use, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, the meaning of purchasing something has been redefined in this way that is very antagonistic to consumers and end users.
Yeah. Audiovar says Wizards of the Coast patched a game Mechanica a couple of years ago, so reading the cards no longer tells you what they do on a physical cardboard product.
Yeah, I
That's really
mean,
funny.
this has been such a long running problem for games like Magic the Gathering or other, even like, Warhammer or minis games and stuff like this. Any of these more traditionally framed games, they're trying to chase this updatability of digital products and to varying degrees of success.
Yeah, it's rough. But yeah, that's that story. I hope that folks who do layout are able to like keep using Affinity in the way that they've been using it. Um, and if they're not, I hope that like uh, I mean, I hope that a competitor shows up and like doesn't flip flop immediately, but like, you know, we're kind of in that we're in the era of there once was a there once was a site there once was an app named Skype. Uh,
Yeah.
Everyone loved Skype. Skype started getting ads. There once was an app named Discord, etc., etc. Um, so
Yeah,
just
right as I break out of the Adobe walled garden, I get hit with this shit.
yeah. Um, let's hit the second one and then we'll take a break, I think. So the second one is the just a quick update on the TTRPGs for Palestine bundle. It is now being bundled on Tiltify, because there were some issues with itch that we've been talking about over the weeks. So I recommend if folks want to submit games to that, they use this. I don't know if the itch bundle will ever is going to happen, but it's yeah, it's rough. It's I've been tracking this like story of itch being kind of iffy with this stuff for God like 2 months now.
Hmm.
And I hope that like they get their shit together.
Yeah, you'd think if it was going to resolve it, they would have figured something out by now. So this move is probably sensible to get out from under that.
Yeah, I
Sword
think
of
it's very
Damocles.
smart on Jess's part, and I wish Jess luck. I will say like not to be an immediate downer, but I do worry a bit about like uh how like I worry about the kind of like extra or non-conventional step to get folks their games here.
Hmm.
Not to say like I don't think this is trustworthy, but more to say like I just worry that there's going to be some uh I don't know. I think there are going to be some challenges here. Um, let me actually get the real link, not the bit.ly. Um,
But even on the level of like you've been pitching and promoting this thing as being one thing, and now it's shifted, and you have to hope that everyone's gonna,
yeah, that it's
motivate
difficult.
themselves to follow you to this other thing. Like it's a big hit to your momentum, and you're definitely gonna see attrition of contributors, buyers, etc. in that kind
Yeah.
of move, which is very
I
sad given that this is a charitable cause.
People can see that I'm blocking PCRF. It's just because they have a blue check mark. I promise. I have I have an attach or I have a thing in my Chrome that does that. But yeah, I agree, and I like um I have a lot of respect for the decision because like uh like I've talked enough, I think, on this show. Not maybe enough, but I've talked a lot on this show about this, so I don't want to bore people. But the fundamental truth of it is like, that there is a genocide going on right now. Like it is perpetrated by, uh, you know, my opinion, it is portrayed by Zionist parties in Israel, and it fucking sucks. And like, I think whatever you can do about this, I think you should. Um,
Yeah, particularly for those of us who live within the bloody-handed machine that is carrying it out, right?
mhm.
Whether that's directly next door, or if you're one of the many countries who are aiding and abetting the genocide happening, such as I live in Canada, and Canada is not so great on this
Yeah,
topic, and I have written various angry letters about it, but it's tough to feel like you can actually do anything or to know what to do. But these kinds of direct support things are very helpful, and people should get behind it.
yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, I think we're going to take a quick take 5. I think so. We'll be back at let's say what how far are we in a minute? Yeah, let's say 48, and see you all in a bit. Be right back. Oh, oh crap! Hang on. Sorry. Okay. Hello, everyone. We're back. I just realized I forgot to put out the news bird. Forgot to put out Cordis. Let me get Cordis out here. Um, it's very important that my birds are here. Okay. Cordis returning from a beautiful desert oasis. Uh, drinking cactus rum out of a little like round cactus. Um, yeah. So, the last story that we have is a pretty complicated one. So I definitely want to make sure that we go through it, respectfully. So, we're gonna be talking about. So I wasn't gonna talk about the story until fairly recently because we're gonna talk about the gay picks situation. So. The reason why I decided I wanted to talk about this is because this came out from Elise Resendez, who is the designer of the Session Zero system from Mythic Row Productions, and associated with Mythic Row was Gabe Hicks, who I'll get into why this is happening a bit later. But Gabe has been removed as the as owner of Mythic Grove, no longer involved in the company, and also it was revealed that some of the writing, or a large amount of the writing that was done for the Session Zero system, was done by Elise here. So the long and short of why Gabe is being removed from Mythic Grove is because of allegations of cheating from his ex, gosh, I really should have gotten the name. My apologies. Here, let me just make sure I can get that. Cam, I wish I could. Oh gosh, Okay, his ex Cam. My apologies. I should have gotten a name, but yeah, cheated on Cam. There are more details to it. There's a TikTok that you can probably find if you'd like to learn more about it. It's like a 10-minute TikTok. The element of it that I think is relevant to talking, because this is a very personal matter. I think the element of it that's relevant to the industry is that the TikTok makes clear that that Gabe was basically to hide his cheating, was kind of shit talking the people that he was cheating with to both his partner and other folks in the industry. And it was to the extent that like at PAX East people were saying like, yeah, I don't work with these people because Gabe has said they're not good. And it's really really rough. And yeah, I think another notable element of this is that Gabe Hicks is not just or wasn't just involved in the Session Zero system, but was also the DM for Dimension 20 Scream Queens, was going to be in Adventure Zone's upcoming superhero campaign. So a lot of like big, high profile APs. There's questions about what they're gonna do. And I think also notably, I'm actually just gonna post this thread in the Twitch just so you can read it yourself, because I think it gives some really good thoughts on Gabe, like the reaction to Gabe, kind of put through a racial lens, because I think that there are like, it's very clear that this is you would not get this sort of reaction if this were a white man who had done this. I think it's fair to say, and I think this draws some reasonable comparisons, and yeah, I guess the reason why I'm kind of sharing all of this extra stuff is just because I want to encourage folks um, to not, like, I think we can say, like, the stuff that he did is really bad, but not use that as justification to be cruel or bigoted or make generalizations. And yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
my thoughts on it. I don't know if you have anything you want to add, Andrea.
I mean, it sucks that, he was very secretly being like a massive missing stair in this whole, and that he was like spread very broadly across the scene. Like the way that this is playing out, where you're finding out that people were, losing opportunities that they maybe deserved or had earned as a result of, his smoke screening for this other stuff he was doing, is definitely very disappointing. And yeah, I mean, it's these kinds of stories happen a lot within this space. We hear about them quite regularly, and I think a lot of that is structural in nature, in the sense that the AP, micro industry, or whatever we want to call it, is typified by everyone being kind of freelancers and having very little kind of security and relying a lot on networking. And so people who are able to insert themselves in key positions are then able to have a lot of leverage and a lot of power. And when they fuck up and get themselves ostracized from the space, it then, everyone in their network kind of gets a load-bearing piece of it wrenched out of it, and you end up, with a lot of fallout from one person's, misdeeds or whatever, and the reaction to it, whether you know however much or little vitriol they deserve, it's very destructive for everyone around them, and people that they've been associated with, whether or not those people were implicated or involved or not. Um,
Yeah,
I had an experience of being in the periphery of one such a similar such event in my time working in the AP space, and it was really sad to discover that like my line in was terminated, and that I then didn't have any way to keep working within that space. And it was like just as I was getting back into it after my, spending most of a year in a hospital and going through all my rehab stuff that I had to do with my spinal cord injury. So it's not just about the person at the headline, it's also about everyone else connected to them who has to then navigate this morass that gets created, and who loses out and misses opportunities as a result, that I always think about.
yeah, it's devastating. Like I was kind of uh like, so being a trans woman on the internet, like I think a lot about I think a lot about cancellation, and I think a lot about like uh
Yep.
the ways that, like, uh liberal and like left leaning folks can inflict that on each other. And I had to kind of navigate that for myself, where I'm like, I have very specific standards for how I talk about other trans women on the internet. And
Yep.
like, this is obviously a person who's outside of that. But also I had to think about, like, okay, so, like, if my orientation towards justice is rehabilitative, um, what does it look like for, like, I think an element that I came across that was really important early on was like the thing that Hicks did you know uh wasn't just doing bad things. Uh it was jacketing other people, right? It was saying
Hmm.
this person is bad and you shouldn't work with them because they're bad, or because they're, an obsessed fan. um and I think it's important when we think about, like, uh quote unquote quote cancellation, like, what is the, you know what opportunities are lost by the victims, and not just what are
Yeah.
opportunities are lost by the perpetrator.
Yeah, exactly.
um
Because it feels really good to ostracize a person, or tear them down and slam them, but that gives no restitution or help or benefit to all these people in the periphery who are being impacted, and they get
yeah,
they get left out, or it's really hard to even understand who is within that group, right? Like they get obscured by the very nature of what's been going on around them.
Yeah, or they don't want to say anything because they're worried about,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Like for
Um,
my vaguely parallel situation, like I just kept my fucking mouth shut and stayed out of it because I was far enough removed from it that bringing it up would kind of just entangle me or implicate me in some way. And it felt like the safest thing I could do was just say nothing, which sucked in its own way. And it was very uncomfortable and strange and alienating. Yeah, it's a very tough situation for a lot of people who are not getting talked about at the moment, I would say.
yeah, I've also seen like I saw I didn't want to like put it in the document because I didn't think it was like notable enough to do so, but I did see someone, talking about how they were still in contact with Gabe and like, recommending like, Gabe, like options for therapy and stuff, and they were getting pushback because uh they were interacting with him, and it's like, what does justice actually look like to us, right? Like, uh,
Yeah,
if we're attacking people who are you know trying to make things better and not just kick people out for certain behaviors, or like
yeah.
maybe Gabe
What
doesn't
is
go
the
back
ends of all of this that you're trying
right.
to get to?
Like
Yeah.
maybe Gabe doesn't come back to the space, but like what is like do we want him to die? Like what's the
Yeah,
you know
exactly. Yeah.
that's the
No one
kind
wants to
of
talk about that end of things, right? They do the quick and immediate thing of like, okay, well, let's get them out of there, which is in some ways a good instinct, right? To like do damage control and mitigate and kind of get them, create a safe buffer. But then the question of then what is never answered.
yeah. I've been thinking a lot about the James Somerton situation.
Hmm.
Are you familiar?
Yeah, yeah. The
Okay.
I watched
Yeah.
that 4 hour long H bomb video.
um
I know that much about it at least.
yeah, and I have to really give it to H bomb and to Harris, and I forget. I think Kat Harris is the person who
Collaborator, editor.
collaborator.
Yeah,
Yeah, um, because they when like the when that like suicide letter from Somerton came out, they were immediately reaching out to like make sure that Somerton was okay. Um, and I think that's like if you have to call people out or act on folks who are repeatedly being a problem in a space, I think that is an important element of it. Is like, okay, are you ready to show this person care too on some level? Or do you know someone who's ready to show this person care? Not to say that people shouldn't call people out, right? But to say like, uh, it's important to think about what happens in the aftermath, and
yeah.
what are the best ways to do this.
You can't just kick them off a cliff.
Yeah. And I think that I think Gabe's ex did this in a perfectly reasonable way. You know, I don't know what the contact situation looks like there. I'm sure there are nuances to that I'm not aware of. I'm more talking about, I think people should really need to be nicer to the folks who are trying to show Gabe care in this moment. Um, and I think folks need to be nicer to Gabe's victims, and I think people need to generally be more respectful about this situation because like these are real people with real lives, and uh, you know you don't want to drive them into like the darkest place where they could possibly go. Um, and I
Yeah,
think fundamentally you should want them to get better if they've done things that are wrong.
and they have lives beyond the products that they create for your consumption
Yeah,
or the parts of themselves that they put forward for your consumption, which I think is another really important thing to remember in these contexts.
absolutely. Um, And yeah, Audiovore says we're also conditioned towards punitive retribution. It takes work to escape that mindset. Yeah,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
but also I think that people have a right to be angry and tired and stressed and to and to rail against this guy because what he did. There are two or more, probably more people were uh, who were canceled for no reason because of this dude. Like,
Yeah,
uh, you know, where's their justice, right? Um, and so it's kind of a complicated situation. Um,
Yeah,
and
and we're cheering for these people, and it feels like a betrayal when these things happen, and that reaction is very visceral. Like, it's sad. It's tragic as well as enraging.
yeah, that is another nuance of it that I hadn't really thought about. Is like, when you have an AP, it's like, or when you have a person who's been on so many APs and such a prominent role on many of them, like it's really hard to like, uh, the fandom is a mass, is a hive that has the potential to create real problems, for like making this a reasonable conversation between adults, because some people just see like they're calling out my guy. What the
Yeah,
hell? Type, 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 type,
yeah,
type, type, type. Yeah.
and like there aren't a ton of black people in the space necessarily. There certainly are a lot of people who are doing the work, but not a lot of people who get who get their roses, who get the accolades, and so to have that play out this way is also like, oh shit, damn.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, yeah, it's like, how long is it going to take for someone, how long is it going to take for someone to take Gabe's place, right? I mean, not to speak in those terms, but
But for
how.
another person to break through the various glass ceilings or nets of oppression that prevent those people from rising to positions of prominence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, and it's rough. Yeah. I think that's pretty much all I got to say about that. Do you have any other thoughts?
It just is sad, and
Yeah, it's a bummer.
for me it like echoes a bunch of stuff that's happened to me, and so it just really is a bummer.
Yeah. Um. Okay. Let's we're gonna try and shake it out, and let's get to mail. We have as always. Hang on. Let me send in Apocrypha the Mailbird flying in. Shoot. Okay. Um. And we have, as always, MVP question asker Goblin, aka Skibbity Boppum Dada, who
I've
sent
heard of this
in,
person.
yes, who sent in 6 wonderful questions. Uh, these all look really good. Um, oh God. um, I'm just looking at some of these, and some of them are very funny. Okay. Um. Oh, okay. This is an interesting one. I really like this because I think there's a lot of angles to take this from. So, our first question from Goblin: general opinions on fantasy pantheons, annoying tropes, fun implementations, worrying trends, etc. I'll let you start if you have any immediate thoughts on these.
Oh gosh. I do love a pantheon. I love a fantasy pantheon. I especially love when people really uh deviate from existing ones that are historical and already out there. But also it's really fun to see people bring in um like for the whole Dagger Isle supplement that Pam Punsalan and various others were putting together, of bringing a bunch of Filipino mythology or Malaysian or Southeast Asian mythology into it, and showing a broader audience a bunch of mythopoetic stuff that they would not have been exposed to, and they get to see and experience all of that is really cool. Breaking away from a lot of the more hegemonic mythological figures like Jesus and Zeus that we see a lot of is great, right? So um, love to see things that are new to me at the very least, and for people to be pulling in and remixing a lot of those ideas, or just making stuff up from whole cloth.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think playing with like toys that are not usually played with is really fun. Um, I would say, for me, an element that I really, well, okay, like an element that I think needs to be interrogated, but I don't necessarily think is bad, is the fact that a lot of fantasy pantheons, the moment that uh like, okay, so it's like, if you have a setting where it's like they're just like clerics of uh I'll use Pathfinder. They're clerics of Iomedae, who are walking around, and they're able to smite people using their using their
Hmm.
enchanted blades that are powered, fueled by Iomide. That's not a god anymore. That's a really powerful being. Um, like that's a
That's an institution within your world, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And like I don't think that's bad necessarily. I just think it's something you need to contend with if you're doing that. Like I do
Yeah.
that in my own writing, but I think you have to play with it.
A feeling that has occurred to me in the course of this discussion is, oh yeah, and the best thing about pantheons of gods is when you go and fucking kill them.
Hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of fantasy that includes like absolute monarchies and all these kinds of things, and I'm like, yeah, and we're gonna kill those people, right? Like
Yeah.
those are the bad guys, right? Like, yeah, I don't know. To me, I think there's power in that as well of like upending these structures that we know are terrible, but that are canonized and hallowed within the fantasy genre and often brought in without any um, critical lens on them and are just kind of they smuggle in a bunch of values with them that people often forget about. So I always try to keep that at the front of my mind and push back against it in my own games.
Yeah. Very 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 much agreed. Um. Okay. Next question. Um. Oh, this is fun. This kind of aligns with something that we've talked about earlier in this episode. How do you implement interesting ideas from other mediums within your TTRPG work? How much do you have to compromise for playability? How often does the cool idea turn out to be completely incompatible? Oh boy. If you have any thoughts on this, go ahead. I gotta think on this one.
I mean, yeah, like my Girl by Moonlight is a game about genre emulation, right? So um, I think I think there's a lot of power in leveraging genre to your advantage, and so I'm going to speak. This is kind of like a certain interpretation or narrow lens on this question, so I apologize if it's not covering
That's okay.
everything. But um,
It's good.
in the course of doing that, something that was important to me was to move away from specific, from like IPification, from like this is the game to play literally Sailor Moon, to rather this is a game or a system or an engine that allows you to create works within a genre space that are your own personal contribution to it, rather than this kind of like shoot up and regurgitated reconsumption of the existing things, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, I think that was something that was important to me in that within that process. And in terms of compromising for playability, I think the big thing for me was designing really pointedly towards that, and that the game is pretty narrow. It's about that one thing, and that ensures playability. I think in trying to bend or adapt other things, if we go to a classic example of like, using D&D to play a mystery game or whatever, right? Like that's where you really start to push at the bounds of what adaptation will permit. And I think I'm, I have a certain stake within. I think there's a big kind of debate or question within role playing games of like, how much does system matter, how much do rules matter, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very flagrantly and openly in deep in the rules matter camp, and that
Right.
systems matter. And I would just say like, pick a game that's going to do the thing you want to do. And if there isn't a game that does that thing, you might need to write it. But that's always my go-to. And then the next best thing that you can do is adapt something that's close. And that's a really fun process. And that's also game design in its own right.
Yeah.
Because yeah, I don't like needing to compromise or hand wave or be left in a really unstructured space when I'm playing role playing games. I play them to have that structure. J Dragon recently did a great little Twitter thread blog post
Hmm.
about this kind of idea of like the the walls and the barriers of rules in games, and I probably agree with their position on this. Those are good and helpful, and you want those to be there.
Rules are
And
a cage, and I'm a puppy girl.
yeah, exactly, right? But
Here, I'll
like,
post that.
also they're like a fun obstacle course, right? There's so many different metaphors you can use for them, but the stuff that they present, the friction, the guidelines, the structure, those are all incredibly useful. I mean, one of the things you hear people complain about so often, right, is coming into a blank page and trying to write something, right? Like, you don't want the game to just be a blank page for you. You want the game to have some ideas and some opinions, and you want to enter into a conversation with it, in my estimation anyways. So
Yeah, so kind of on this angle, something I've been thinking about. Um, I I've been realizing like I'm not a um when I design games, I'm not often thinking about genre emulation. I'm often thinking about like I I kind of want to just like take all my toys and put them together. Um,
mm,
and so I'm like, what if the Everfall from Dragon's Dogma 1 was just like set on top of a like, you know, a pretty accurate recreation of like, like Norse lifestyles and like the in like the Middle
mm,
Ages, and then like over here there's uh some like, weird post-apocalyptic shit. Like I'm really into the idea of just like going full gonzo with it, taking everything that you have and playing with it in ways that are um, that should be incompatible, and seeing what kind of comes up from the connections. Um,
yeah, you're remixing and sampling, right?
yeah,
Like, yeah,
and a lot of that winds up being sometimes just like taking mechanics or ideas or like uh, beats from games or movies or books that I really enjoy. Um, and yeah, I think that that's like a big thing for me. I also read a lot of TTRPGs, so that'll have an effect often. I know it's not,
hmm,
that wasn't part of
hmm,
the question, but I do draw a lot from TTRPGs in terms of like design philosophy. Um, and yeah, that's kind of my thought on it. Uh, question three. Uh, I think it's kind of similar. Well, it has elements. Question three: how do you make unique mechanics without them being incomprehensible? For example, the dual mechanics for Lace and Steel. I've yet to see anything like uh, that emulates a sword duel incredibly well. It also is a Byzantine work of cards and pain, and has left me destitute trying to unravel. Um, I think just like reading it to other people, I think is really useful. Like making sure that you are playtesting. I think like all this stuff is really good for making sure that your stuff is comprehensible, and
yeah.
like
The
good for play.
user acceptance testing
Mhm.
framework, right? Of like, do people tolerate this thing or not? Is definitely important. But sorry, I jumped in. I
No, that
apologize.
was pretty much my thought on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's something here about uh, a shared language of play, um, and you can bump into barriers in this regard in really surprising ways when you go from play culture, like when you span between multiple play cultures. It's part of why a lot of RPG rulebooks explain things at great length with many examples in many different ways, is to try to accommodate all the different places that people might be coming to your idea from. Um, but I also think it's why we see a lot of why you see a lot of PBTA games or Fortune in the Dark games or things like that, is that you they're easier for people to uptake because they're built out of, at least in their foundations, a shared language of game mechanics that are familiar. And so then you're adding just a little bit to a place that they're familiar with, right? You're building one or two steps out from familiar territory for them. um, and so you can make really avant-garde shit, and that's totally cool, but you will bump into friction with players, and you will have to ask a bigger buy-in or a bigger learning curve or a bit more generosity from them in reading it.
Yeah, it's the
And
difference between
that's
handing someone the border to a puzzle and then just all the pieces in a
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's a great way to describe it. So yeah, I think being really conscious of the fact that that's what you're asking of them might help you frame or parcel out that information in ways that are a bit more approachable. Um, but also, that's the risk you run of being of working in unknown territory, is that you will return from it foreign to everyone that you know who lived where you were previously. And that translation is always going to be difficult, I think.
Coming back from the depths of the game design cave with wild hair and just like branches
Yeah,
and creatures stuck in my skin. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Right. So
yeah,
so
this will
yeah,
happen.
it's difficult. It's difficult.
I'm
I'm really
being
worried. I'm really worried about that for some of my projects coming up. So
I wish you the most luck. I think you'll do well. I'm also working on some stuff that has some fairly different mechanics, so I'm excited to see how folks latch onto those. Um, the next question is: you mentioned that your Chrome has plugins. This is for me. Has plugins that block checkmarked people on Twitter. Do you use Google Chrome? If so, I'm throwing pebbles at you. Genuinely, I don't care, but it's funny to act like using Firefox is praxis. I'm dodging your pebbles. I'm literally like, hang on, let me. You're throwing pebbles, and I'm going like I'm going I'm going like this. I'm like
oh
zooming
damn.
around. Like you can't even get me. Um. Next question. Um. God. Uh.
Question 3 was so leading, it must have been written by someone in role-playing games, is all I can say to that.
This is the same. This is Goblin. So you know. Uh. This is another one. As someone who recently got an ADHD diagnosis to add on to autism, dear God, how do I comprehend rules that are more complicated than lasers and feelings? Every time I read a book that is more crunched than a soft-boiled egg, my mind crumbles in and assumes the most ingratiating posture of surrender imaginable. Uh, read slow and purposefully. I mean, it's hard to like put yourself in that mindset, but if you're able to like sit down, get some tea, like no other tabs open, no other windows open, just the book, look at the text, read the words like one at a time. Like sometimes I'll do this if I'm in like if I'm really scattered. Um because the thing is like you uh I think there's like some of us have long COVID, myself included.
Mm,
We our attention, not necessarily our attention spans, but like our um the way that we try and read things, I think, are affected by the way the internet is, and the way that like the content we're consuming is. And so I think part of it has to be like you have to kind of think in the like when you were in high school and you were reading things like mindset. You have to think in the like uh I am sitting down to complete this, maybe not complete this assignment, but I'm sitting down to enjoy this thing and understand it. Take notes. That's very helpful. Um, to test out mechanics, like be like, okay, so this is telling me if I had X character, I have to roll like 2d6 plus Y, and I'm gonna roll that, and then like, okay, so I got this result. What does that do? Do your own little like mini play tests with yourself. I think that's a good way. Um, yeah,
mm. Yeah, something I would add is consider, if this is useful to you, diagramming it out. So either like making a flow chart or having like flashcards or whatever. If there's like a particular mechanic in a game that always ends up being a stumbling block, like build yourself a little tool or support system that helps you navigate it. And then that can be useful too, because you can annotate it, notice there's like this particular moment where we get into trouble or whatever. And this could apply to your unique problem, but also just to like anyone playing games if they're struggling to like, you know, have good responses to hard move when they're prompted with needing to do a hard move and then powered by the apocalypse game or whatever, right? Like those points of friction, you can build yourself a toolkit to navigate them better. And for me, that often looks like having a kind of like exploded diagram of the mechanic and being able to see all the moving parts that are interacting. And, if I need to, march myself piece by piece through them in a way where I can't get lost as I move through it.
yeah. I think what Audiovore and Lilith, the Jewish Cthulhu, are saying in the chat is very much in alignment. Um, which to kind of summarize is like uh, Audiovore is saying like only like they can only understand rules as they become relevant in play. Um,
Mm,
and Lilith is saying like know how you learn, and I think that's really useful. Lilith says reading out loud and doing mock plays is really helpful for her. So there are so many different ways to do it. Don't feel like you just have to read directly. Don't feel like you should immediately get every mechanic that you look at.
Yeah, I think most people who seem to be doing this effortlessly are probably doing a bunch of work behind the scenes. They have academic backgrounds where they read a lot and know how to like take in information from books, make good notes, parse it, collate it, collect it in their minds, these kinds of things. I wouldn't feel don't feel bad if you need to do more than just have the book in front of you.
Yeah. This is Goblin's last question. Speaking of neurodivergence, how would you recommend a person with ADHD and social autism make accommodations for themselves so they can complete a teacher RPG?
I also need an answer to this question. On some level, yeah, I'm not sure I have great advice to give, unfortunately.
I'm autistic. I'm very finicky. I would say like just know your limits. Be like, hey, could we end an hour early today? And like most of the time, folks will be okay with it. Um, you know, as long as you have good groups, I guess. Um,
Yeah,
be
your
like,
friends that you play with should be there to have a nice time with you. And if they know that you're having a bad time and they're able to still have a good time, that is I have some questions about that.
yeah, take frequent breaks. Play with folks you know that you're comfortable with. Um, take it slow. Play games that enable you to take it slow. I think that don't
Hmm.
require you to rush. That don't have like. I don't recommend. Well, I don't know. It depends on what type. I don't know what type of autism you have. The type of autism that I have, I will get stressed to a degree that is like uh dangerous, high voltage stress if I play a game
Mm,
that has like an hour long combats. But I know some autistic people that's heaven for them. That's
that's the happy space. Yeah.
they love that. So find things that work for you, and just make sure you're playing with folks that you're comfortable with in an environment that you're comfortable with timing that you're comfortable with, and play a lot so you can figure out where those limits lie, and then don't be afraid to say what those limits are to other folks, because you're never being a
Yeah.
burden. You're just helping everybody else know what you need to be the best possible player that you can.
One thing I'll throw in that is helpful for me because I often have a lot of interpersonal anxiety that builds up over the course of a play session. And having like essentially having like an aftercare conversation with the other players is really nice. Some people will do like roses and thorns or stars and rainbows or whatever name they have for these kinds of procedures of post play, uh, you know, denouement or whatever, right? You get to talk to people about the things you liked and what happened in the game, and if there were like rules you were struggling with, or just to get a sense of like, oh, did they have a good time? Was it good for them too? These are all things that are very helpful to know if you're feeling really, hung up on like, was everyone having fun? Was I making them have a better or worse time? On and on and on. So for me, that's a lot of what I go through, and I find that those conversations after the fact are great. And the era of playing online has been tough because it's really easy for people to be like, oh, we're done playing. Okay, bye. And they just like close the thing.
Oh
And
God,
there
yeah.
isn't that like, people aren't like collecting their things and putting on their coats. There isn't this off ramp from the experience. And so I kind of often get left bereft at the end of it unless I explicitly request that we like stay and chat for a bit after the fact and make time to do that as well. So yeah, this whole notion of identifying your points of friction and seeking accommodation, I think, is great advice, which Eclipse gave us earlier, and I can only echo that with my own little spin on it.
Yeah, I would agree. I also Lilith in chat, who's a person I play with very often. We always do stars and wishes after any of our games, and then like very often if it's a game in my server, my teacher appreciate server, I'll usually be like, hey, I'm gonna be in the general chat. If anyone wants to hang out in
Mm,
there, we'll just be fucking around. Um,
yeah,
and that
powerful
helps create
move.
more of a uh, it helps things be more human and more warm and comfortable, I think.
A convivial atmosphere following the playing of the game. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of Lilith, I have an email from Lilith which says, "What are y'all's hottest fancy takes?" Oh God.
Uh-oh.
Uh,
Hottest fancy takes, was it? Or fantasy takes?
fantasy. Yeah, the latter.
Fantasy takes. Oh gosh.
Uh.
Uh it's mostly bad. Maybe that's lukewarm though. I don't know.
No, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I made that comment earlier about like fantasy sneaking in a lot of values through its kind of tropes and the baggage that it brings, and I think that that is like I can't emphasize that enough. And that stuff's going to be like cockroaches under the fridge. You're going to keep finding them the more you shine a light into the dark corners of the genre. Um, and broadly, I feel like we should get more excited about, and I don't say this to like be negative towards fan fiction, because I think fan fiction is great and is actually kind of doing this thing that I'm trying to get at, which is like we should be excited about being authors of our own new stuff. And that will always involve building, stripping apart and building out of things that we know. But if we break them down critically and conscientiously, then we can, find those broken cogs and rotten parts of them and leave those out when we then go and make new stuff. Whereas if we are constantly just porting things forward and playing in Faerun or whatever, right? Like if we're just constantly retreading these same paths, every pothole and rut in that path is still there the second time round and certainly hasn't gotten better. Or if there is maintenance, it's insufficient a lot of the time. So yeah, I would say I'm very much of the spirit of like people should be authoring their own unique stuff and bringing their own values to it and making sure that it reflects them and includes them in ways that a lot of canned settings and fantasy materials really, really won't. Um,
I really agree.
and then kill all the kings and gods. Just kill them.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I listen. I have a lot of respect for Pathfinder, but also I'm like, let yourselves go free. Go fully free. Um, I what is my hottest fan? Okay, here's my hottest fantasy take. I think that a lot of the people who, oh god, this is gonna get me. I don't know if this is gonna get me in trouble, but it might. Um, a lot of the people who identify, like orcs, goblin, like the way that like orcs, goblins, dark elves, etc., are treated as eugenicist, don't understand the ways in which it's eugenicist, and then are like, here's my solution to it, and then recreate it.
Yep.
I
Yep.
I literally I saw a thing earlier this week where it was like, here's my solution for orcs. Uh, orcs are people who were drowned in hell, and they're inherently evil, and they've returned to the world, and they're evil, but they can be fixed. And then they're not orcs anymore, and
They
it's
just
like
need to be civilized. They just need us to come and civilize them with give them Shakespeare and other forms of, yeah, come on.
yeah, you didn't understand what the problem was, buddy.
You really missed it on that one, my friend. Yeah.
Yeah, there is
Yeah.
maybe a like perhaps a version of this that's like orcs are, uh, you know, like maybe you take a Tolkienic element, or like a Tolkienic angle, right? Like it's like orcs are made in the furnaces of hell, and walk out, and they are a like they are a constructed people uh who are beholden to the whims of their evil masters, and maybe not evil, but that they're fascist masters, they're industrialist masters, and are sent to uh to, to, to kill people, but they are like still orcs if they decide to not do that anymore, first of all. And like many of them convert because they realize that the things that they've been sent to do are bad. Or you could just have orcs not be evil. That's another, like, you don't need to have them be evil guys. They could be just normal.
Yeah, the fact that these games depend on having like an ontologically evil other that it's okay to murder and steal from and invade the territory of, that is inextricable from so many, colonialist, racist, eugenic view. Like you just the the actions of the game are inherently tied to all of those practices, even if you give orcs their own full culture and whatever else. If you're playing D&D, you're probably still going to where they live and killing them and taking their stuff.
Exactly.
And that's bad.
Yeah, uh, there's a reason why I have not touched on orcs yet in Sapphic World. It's because they're a thing that's complicated enough that I'm like basically writing an entire other book for them. on some level. Because yeah, they're
Yeah.
complicated.
And I mean, I can see all kinds of ways in the context of, like sapphic eroticism,
Hmm.
how like big, burly, tusked women, that's going to carry, there's tons of racism lurking in wait
Yes.
there, or like, butch phobia, or all these other, there's like all kinds of nasty angles that you could build into that, given all the ways that those things are stigmatized in our white supremacist society. And we got to be really careful about not bringing those parts of our upbringing and our enculturation into our fantasy. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very delicate business, and you want to be able to reclaim that stuff because big muscly tusked women are extremely hot, they should call me.
Hmm.
And you know yeah,
Yeah.
how can I not be a white supremacist in the course of my fetishization or eroticization, etc., of that? It's a
There
tricky business.
there are also nuances. God, Sapphic World's a fucking mess because like it's there's a lot of elements that I put together because it's like uh so there's like the it's I'm Jewish, and so there's a lot of like Kabbalist elements in the setting. Like the
Mm,
entire thing is framed around like the Sephiroth and the Qliphoth, um and so like uh the kind of like orc-esque characters are going to be Qliphothic, but like the Qliphoth is not a place of demons necessarily. It's like a just descending series of like strange like mega structures and stuff with like people like slowly working to create like a single uh like perfect nugget that they can feed to the mouth of the world so that the world perpetuates itself. So it's gonna
mm.
be silly. We love to get a little silly with it. So I guess my hottest fantasy take is I don't know, make things in your fantasy setting less about birth, I guess, and less like eugenicist, and try
Yeah.
and play with some other stuff. You got a bunch of toys you can play with. Um, you don't have to play with the with the calipers every time. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
put the calipers down.
exactly. I feel like I got another question here. Oh yeah, from Catgirl Help. Why do TTRPGs have so many parallels to sex? Uh, I mean, I don't know if that was a real question, but I'm answering it. Uh,
Yes, let's talk about this.
well, because like kink and like games are so much about consent because I mean this comparison has been made, but games are so much about consent because like you're talking about how do I uh how do I do things at a table as a GM or a player and make sure that the other people at the table are comfortable with what's happening? Um, and so you need mechanisms to do that, and that is it's the same thing with sex and sexuality and kink, where it's like you need tools to make sure that the other people in the scene that you're in, or in the sexual situation that you're in, are comfortable with what's happening. Um, and so I think that's where a lot of those comparisons come up, uh, because they're really useful.
Yeah, and it is you're trying to please other people.
Yeah.
You are pleasuring each other, just not like that. And so a lot of the same social dynamics emerge within that. And if the kink community has figured out a bunch of good ways to go about that, we should borrow that for TTRPGs. But just always remember to cite it, I think, is really important.
Mhm.
We shouldn't defang or desex those practices and be puritanical about it for its own sake. I think it's really important to pay homage to our kinky siblings and appreciate their work that they did for us when we then adopt it into our own practice. And I think too, there's this aspect of role playing is a folk practice. It's not a formalized field. It's not institutionally driven necessarily. Like there is this way that it is a bottom up movement in its roots and remains so in a lot of its ongoing practice, because even a TTRPG rulebook cannot fully prescribe the act of play. And so you depend on each other in this way, and it's a messy interpersonal and emergent experience, and so you do need to be mindful of other people and empathetic to them and intermingle with them and inhabit space with them in all of these important ways. So yeah, it's deep in the bones of it.
Yeah. You'd said that, like, you might not be having actual sex in play, and, like, you know not if I can help it. But no, yeah, I totally agree. I think, like, uh, I think being cognizant of what you're taking and where you're using it and all that stuff is really crucial. Um, and Yeah, does anyone have any other questions, either to send to us via email or just ask in the chat? We're here to talk to you, for like another 10-20 minutes, however long we decide to go. If the well dries up, we might just wrap up. But if you all have more questions, feel free to ask. Yeah, we are happy to talk about whatever subjects you so desire. But you can also just shoot the shit, if you have any any TTRPG subjects you'd like to talk about, Andrew.
Oh gosh, I mean, I said earlier that I have had this kind of experience of feeling a little bit isolated from the community and the space, and so it's really nice to have this conversation at all. Right, these kinds of things help me build that sense of connectedness, and also like that same thing is true for queer spaces and stuff like that. And so it's really convenient that TTRPGs are broadly a pretty queer space, or at least the corners of it that I move in, because yeah, it's been for me. There's a bunch of like stuff around disability as well as the pandemic and other things that kind of all coincided to make that happen. So I'm just going to say that I appreciate you chatting with me this evening, and also everyone who showed up in chat and shared questions and participated in this. It's nice to feel a part of the practice and the scene, the hobby, whatever we want to call it.
Well, yeah, thank you, and absolutely. I I think about this a lot because recently I've kind of made a habit um of working on my games in call, and working on my games in a call with other folks, and that's been really great because it's been like, you know, sharing ideas and bouncing back and forth and thinking about things together. Um, and I generally, like, I know how isolating making things can be, and making things when other things are happening to you can be really isolating. And so my hope is that the space can be, uh, can be good for that. Um, we have Cat Girl Help says, no questions really. Just wanted to say hi to Andrew. I've seen a lot of your game streams, and I love the RP I've seen from you. Oh, that's lovely.
That's very sweet. Thank you. It's really nice to hear.
That's awesome. Uh, Goblin's Rule Forever says, how to make a game about the eroticism of cannibalism without my friends thinking it's becoming a pattern with me talking about cannibalism.
I mean, you got to just sublimate that shit into metaphor. You know?
Right, yeah, like candy.
Just couch it one layer deep.
Spaghetti, do like a Shruganona type sitch.
Have really texturally, a particular way appetizers that you serve at your gaming sessions to get people in the mood.
Get some really gamey meat. Get some like duck or horse.
But in all seriousness, the how to describe this? The conflation of consumption with sexual desire or sexuality in general is a very powerful image and metaphor to work within. I think that that's actually pretty accessible to a lot of people. And there's like a particular game session that I ran of one of the one shots for my game that like really went there at one point. And it was great. And, not everyone in that game had a vor fetish or anything, but they were like into that scene where like someone's heart had like blossomed out as this like weird fungal growth blooming thing that was like sweet and peach like, and then this was the villain who was tempting one of the protagonists to like eat her heart basically, and it was extremely sexually charged.
God, that's hot. I
love
that.
Uncomfortable and like really tense and weird, and like that works, and that works if you're into cannibalism or not, because that's just there's like a whole bunch of stuff that's a conflux of many different types of desire and desire as symbolic of and blah blah blah, right? There were all these ideas of like gender and identity and someone's kind of trans envy that was tied up in it. It was this whole complicated thing. But all of that to say, symbolism can work and be good, and people don't have to be into the literal imagery to appreciate the symbolic power of things.
Yeah, and I also think like, listen, I am a person, I Sapphic World is full of a bunch of kinks. It's like 90% kink. Uh, it's out there. And I I feel like for me it winds up being like uh I I need like it's become important for me lately not to feel like I have to apologize for these things and not to feel like
Mm.
if things come up more than once uh I'm somehow letting people down by being too into the things that I'm into. Like it is what it is, and people are gonna deal with it, right? Um,
And people love freaks. Okay,
we love
people love it.
freaks.
It's
Yeah.
actually cool. At least if they're cool, they should have an appreciation for freaks. And if they don't appreciate freaks, they should cultivate an appreciation within themselves, because you miss out on so much cool art and design and all this kind of stuff if you can't get down with the freaks.
Yes.
Sorry, not to call you a freak in
No,
a way
I
that would be
am.
negatively connoted.
No, it's real.
Okay,
Uh,
good. Glad we're on the same page with that.
I'm freak
Sorry.
good. I'm freak bad. And everything in between. um, yeah. No, I totally agree. I think you gotta get out here. I'm writing a game that has some art in it. That's just a creature that has that has genitalia that's a fusion between like a minigun and a dog cock. Like we're
All
cooking out
right.
here. And like you have to be okay with like if you can't take the heat, then think a little bit and then go back into the kitchen and keep cooking because we want you to make beautiful work.
Yeah, put on your oven mitts and get back in there.
Yeah, make something beautiful, make something wonderful, make something strange. Um,
And yeah, kill the Puritan in your head, because particularly in North America, like we live in a culture founded on people who hated fun so much that they had to leave England
yeah,
or Scotland even. Like you got to really think about how fucking ice chewing those people were, and like, that's only a few generations back, and they thought like art was bad, that you shouldn't have like a painting in your house, and that's ungodly. Like
God.
there is a really sick strain of Puritanism that is deeply ingrained and underpins a lot of the society that we live in North America, at least. And like, yeah, it's bad. You need to really work against that. That is like damage that we are all given as we are enculturated, that we need to mend and reclaim. So
We need to scare these people.
yeah, it is good to do that. Actually, it is productive and good.
Yeah.
And don't assault people or entrap them or do fucked up things, but
Hmm.
like invite them into your cool, strange, and haunted spaces, by all means, and they should be able to get excited about that.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Um, I think it's probably a good time to wrap. It'll give me a little bit of time to see if I want to eat something.
Oh
So
yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
Thank you all for watching. Thank you, Andrew, for guesting on this. This was wonderful. It was a pleasure to meet you and a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah,
And
it was such a delight. Thanks for having
do
me.
you have anything else that you'd like to throw people towards before we wrap up?
Um, Gosh, okay. If you're interested in Forged in the Dark games, I would check out Sydney Waxwing's their Daily Blade posts that they've been doing. This is like a little blog series that Sydney Icarus has been doing, and Sydney is very cool and good. Check out their stuff. Um, Also, check out Apocalypse Keys and Ray's work in general. Um, Check out Pam Punzalan and all of the people that she's brought in to working on the Dagger Isle supplement for Blades in the Dark, which is going to be coming out at some point. But there's tons of good work going on in that. Free Palestine,
Hmm.
go to a protest, do a bunch of things that I can't say on Twitch because of their terms of service. Uh, yeah, those would be the things I would plug. And you can follow me if you want. It's going to be pretty quiet on my end of things for a while, but at some point there will be more games. And you can check out Girl My Moonlight. It's a game about tragic magical girls that is extremely queer and trans oriented, and is a deeply personal expression of my own experience of all of those things. And that's available through Evil Hat Press.
Hell yeah. Yeah, thank you again, and everybody have a good one. We're going to raid, I had them, where are they? Here we go. We're gonna raid It's Casey Time, who's playing Monster Hunter, with my friend Grief. Casey is trying to get some money together for their move. This is the last day, I believe, of that, so go say hi, go give some money if you can, and, yeah, take care, everybody, and I'll be back next week with... Who am I... I need to remember. Pelham from Mars, who's a really cool friend. So, yeah, go say... yeah, see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Remember, if you don't like what you see, you can change it. It's up to you, really. Goodbye, good luck, and have fun!